guys, Prowl 1701 here, and today we're going to be reviewing Timelash from the Season 22 box set. Now, this is the first time I have watched Timelash with the original effects. I've only seen it once before when the Season 22 box set first came out, and I had viewed it with the updated effects. But I had a poll recently about watching a story that I'd seen before, but that I had never seen in that format. Like, for instance, Underwater Menace with full color animation was one of the options, and Paradise Towers with the original incidental music was one of the options. So ways I had never viewed those stories before, but Timelash with the original effects won that poll. So I did watch it. I was a little apprehensive because, well, the effects are a little naffed, and I had always assumed the updated effects really did help my opinion of the story, because I actually enjoyed Timelash on my first viewing with the updated effects and found it to be an underrated story. I tend to like all of Season 22. And interestingly enough, Timelash, even with the original effects, I still enjoy it for the most part. First off, it's still got Paul Darrow. I love Paul Darrow. I mean, I know he's only in like the first half of episode 2. And of course, this is a two-parter since Season 22 was done in that 45-minute format instead of the 25-minute format, and it's just 2 parts at 45 minutes. But I love Paul Darrow's performance. I just love his over-the-top performance. He's such a joy to watch in all of this. I really like most of Colin Baker's performance. He does have a couple moments early on where he's kind of his over-the-top self. Bad, 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 which are a little... But once I settle into him, he's good. And he has some really good scenes at the end of the story in the TARDIS with Perry and Herbert, which I'll get onto when I get to them. Part 1 is really strong. I really enjoyed Part 1. It flowed really well. It never seemed to drag. Matter of fact, the whole episode moved at quite a clip. The whole story actually moves at a pretty good clip, actually, with its 45-minute runtime in both parts. But Part 1 I really enjoyed. I loved the pacing. The original effects aren't overly impressive, but for the most part, they're acceptable. The laser blast from the android are a boring gray, which don't do much for me. But they're fine, with one exception we'll get to when we get to part 2. But they're okay enough. I love the android design. I absolutely love the way the android is executed on screen with the makeup, the kind of blue-green makeup here, the yellow hair. It very much looks like an android. I totally buy it's an android, a very humanoid-looking android. The way it talks with that voice and the way it moves with its body movement, it's one of the best done androids in Doctor Who. Honestly, I was really pleased with it. The Borad makeup is phenomenal. I think most people, even if you don't like Timelash, I think most people will agree with me. The Borad makeup is very well done. I think it even stands up with some makeup in modern Who. It looks really good. There are times when classic Who really pulls out the stops. The Destroyer in Battlefield being another really good example. But the Borad looks really good. His performance is really good, and the makeup looks really good. I also like seeing Dennis playing the fake Borad. Of course, Dennis also plays in Shada as the Professor, and in The Keeper of Traken as the Keeper. It was nice to see him back in this, even though he's only in it a little. It's nice to see him there. Immediately I recognize him, and he needs to be offering me some tea. The cliffhanger is really good. I mean, the story moves a little too briskly at times. The fact that everything kind of devolves on that planet as fast as it does, with people getting killed and thrown into Timelash, it's hard to believe that could happen quite that fast. But again, it never drags. I did like the cliffhanger to part 1. With the Doctor almost getting thrown into the Timelash. That's a pretty cool cliffhanger. I don't like the fact that the reprisal of it at the beginning of part 2 is so long. Like, there's so much of the cliffhanger for part 1 they show at the beginning of part 2. That's a little too much. Now, part 2, the first 30 minutes or so of it, I'm not going to lie, that does get a little uninteresting. I don't want to say it drags, but it gets uninteresting. I started getting a little bored with part 2 for about the first 25 to 30 minutes. Started getting a little uninterested. Started going, okay, maybe it's not as good as I remember. But the last 15 minutes of it or so are really good and really picks the story back up and saves it, which I like. Now, the one really bad executed thing in the original effects version of the story is when the Doctor's inside the Timelash. That's just unfortunately bad. The updated version of it is much better, although the updated version of it, the whole scene in the Timelash is too long in both versions of the story. It honestly needs to be edited down. He's in the Timelash too long. I get it has to happen to pad the runtime, but it just gets tedious to watch with the Doctor getting the crystals and them going to help him, and I'm sitting there going, getting bored now. Now, with the updated effects, that scene looks a lot better, but watching it starts to make your eyes hurt, or at least makes my eyes hurt. When he's down there in the Timelash with the updated effects, my eyes start to hurt. With the original effects, it just looks bad. That is the one time where my willing suspension of disbelief is kind of like, because it just looks like a poorly made set, especially with the little silver streamers. I just can't take that scene seriously, and the fact it drags on far too long. That could cut that scene in half, at least half. Cut it into a third, and it would work so much better. The scene when the Doctor actually kills the Borad for the first time, also, it goes on a little too long. I feel like Paul Darrow's death is a little too easily done, because Paul Darrow knows that the Borad kills the little laser in front of him, because he watched the Borad kill another guy with it already. So the fact he literally steps in front of it to be like, no, I can't let you do that, because he's out of the line of fire on this side of the Doctor. But when he decides to betray the Borad, he steps on the other side of him, right into the line of fire. That's a little too convenient. Plus, I wish we'd had Paul Darrow and more of part 2. But the whole scene when the Doctor's doing the time displacement thing to trick the Borad, it just. Now, the Borad coming back at the end with the cloning thing, I get that. It's not a very original idea. I get that it's, again, to kind of pad the story. It's fine. I believe the Borad would clone himself. It's kind of odd that the Borad would just be running around at random. I mean, it's a little plot convenient for him to show up at the end just to grab Perry. How he sneaks in the room is also beyond me. Like I said, there's some plot convenience going on here at the end, but I'm fine with it. I love the scene at the end when the Doctor's in the TARDIS, first with Perry and then with Herbert. I love that scene. Part of it is just down to the performance, especially Colin Baker. He's so good in this. I love when he realizes he might get killed trying to stop the missile, so he wants Perry out of there, and he's trying to be nice in his Sixth Doctor way to get her out of there, and even Perry's like, I'm a little suspicious, you're being too reasonable. And I love the way that Colin goes, then I shall be unreasonable. Get out! I love the way he does that. Then I shall be unreasonable. And then just yells get out at her. And then they have this little conversation where he's not exactly saying, I might die. You need to stay here and live, because if you keep arguing with me, everybody's going to die. Because it's like he's trying to show that he cares about her. It's obvious he cares about her, paying attention to the scene, but he's having to do it in his Sixth Doctor way, which isn't the most open way of saying he cares about her. But it's a really touching scene, which really kind of shows the bond between them, I think. Which isn't always clear, especially in season 22 between them, but to show that the Sixth Doctor does care. I truly do like that. And then, right after she leaves, of course, Herbert's stowed back on. One of my favorite scenes, I cannot get over how much I love this. When the Doctor's working, and Herbert comes out of hiding, and he's like, hello, and the Doctor's like, hello. What are you doing here? I love when the Doctor says hello back, and then realizes Herbert's back in there. The look he gives Herbert is one of the funniest. I love that look. I would love this episode for that look alone. If I didn't already like Timelash, I would have to love it just for the look. The look he gives Herbert, it's just, he's looking down, what are you doing here? Hello?
Hello. What are you doing here?
I cannot put into words how much I love that look. I've talked about this before. Colin's really good at this. He does the same thing in Mark of the Ronnie when he gets ready to sabotage the Ronnie's TARDIS. You guys have y'all heard me talk about how I love that little smile he gives when he like has a screwdriver in his hand. He walks up to her TARDIS. He's just like. So I love what he does with his expression. Just that. I can't get over how much I just fell in love with that moment. He was like, "What are you doing here?" And then that whole bit when he's talking with Herbert about it is really, really, really good. And I like how it even connects to the fact that, you know, sometimes the Doctor's in these situations where you're like, well, why didn't he just go back in time a minute and stop it? You know, like Adric, why doesn't he just teleport onto the TARDIS, you know, the ship and get Adric off? Why can't he do that? The same thing here. Why can't whatever it is Herbert suggests he does? And the Doctor explains, sometime when there's time, I'll kind of explain to you some of the time laws that I can't break.
Should there be another day, I will explain to you in great detail which of the many time laws I am not allowed to transgress. Who would know? I would. So would every other Time Lord from here to Gallifrey, and I can assure you, they're not all as pleasant and agreeable as I am.
So I love the fact that it at least alludes to the fact that the Doctor can't do just a cop-out using a time machine to get away or to do something else to stop it. That there are some kind of law that it kind of like how the 10th Doctor mentions in the End of Time, you know, where I have to stay relative to the causal nexus. It doesn't really make sense, but at least they try. It's the same thing here. At least they try to explain that he can't take that, what we would assume would be the easy way out. And the fact when he's like, well, who will know? And he's like, I would. And so at every Time Lord between here and Gallifrey. I like that. I love the way Colin delivers those lines. Colin Baker was really on his A game. He was really at S tier on the day when they were recording this, because every single line he delivers is just spot on. Even when he tells Herbert, shut up, because he's trying to focus. I absolutely love that. Could be honestly one of my favorite scenes with Colin as the Doctor, when he's first talking to Perry and then with Herbert in the TARDIS before the impact of the missile. I just love his performance. It really sells this story for me. Now, the effects of the missile hitting aren't overly impressive with the original effects, but they're okay. That missile moves incredibly slow. I guess it's because it's actually just traveling so far. Makes it look slow, but it looks slow. And then I like the bit at the end when they use the mirror to trick the Borad into going into the Timelash. Again, that whole scene when the Borad is somehow cloned and still alive feels like padding. It just really feels like padding to fill out the runtime. But I do like how it connects the dots with the Borad traveling into the past, where he ends up in Scotland. I love that bit about, well, won't he be seen? And the Doctor's just like, occasionally. I love the fact that it's basically alluding to him being the Loch Ness Monster without coming out and saying it. Again, one of the things I like about classic Doctor Who, unlike sometimes in modern Doctor Who, it doesn't think its audience is stupid. Another video I'm working on about modern Doctor Who and politics actually talks about how modern Doctor Who sometimes the way it gets its politics across is very condescending and patronizing, like it thinks its audience is stupid. Whereas classic Doctor Who never really does that to me. Like, it doesn't have to explain to you, hey, this is the Loch Ness Monster, because it expects its audience to be smart enough to connect the dots to that, which to me just makes it feel more fun and more well done, which I like. And then, of course, with Herbert turning out to be H.G. Wells, that's cool. We didn't get a lot of historical figures the Doctor really met in Classic Who, especially post-First Doctor. So I think it's neat how it snuck H.G. Wells into the story, and you don't even realize it till the end. That's actually pretty cool. It's a really fun watch. Even with the original effects, I still enjoyed it. Like I said, there's that 30 minutes during part 2 where it kind of slows down, especially when the Doctor's in the Timelash, where it kind of takes me out of it. But those last 15 minutes are so good, it brings me right back into it, and I really enjoyed those. And
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Thought part 1 was really good. So even with the original effects, I like Timelash. I think it's one of Colin's best performances in the role. I love Paul Darrow in the role. Not a big fan of Perry. She doesn't have much to do here. She basically screams and gets captured a lot. Honestly, 60s companions were oftentimes written better than Perry, at least going by this story. That's a little sad. But again, I like the set design. It's kind of basic, but it's fine. Costume design was fine, and that android is really well designed. So one quick addendum real quick about Timelash. Another thing I really like about Timelash is that it looks and feels like Doctor Who. I'm very comfortable watching it. One of the things I talk about in my Jodie Whittaker era video is that the Jodie Whittaker era looks so different. It has a very cinematic look to it that an argument could be made it doesn't look like Doctor Who, what we traditionally think Doctor Who looking like. And thus doesn't feel like Doctor Who. That the Whittaker era can put people off because it doesn't feel like Doctor Who because it looks so different with the camera styles and stuff using that cinematic look it has. Whereas Timelash looks like Doctor Who. It feels like Doctor Who. I'm very comfortable watching it. It's got the Doctor Who 80s sets. It's got Paul Darrow chewing the scenery. It feels like I'm watching Doctor Who. I feel very comfortable with this episode. That it just feels, especially having just come off working on the Jodie Whittaker video before I watched Timelash, or in the process of working on that Jodie Whittaker video. Timelash, the watch, even with the original effects, I was just comfortable watching it and happy. So I feel like the feel of the episode, the fact it feels like just traditional Doctor Who, that even though it's only the second time I've watched this episode, almost has a nostalgic feel to it because it looks and feels like 80s Doctor Who. So I feel right at home with it, if that makes any sense. Something I had thought about later and wanted to add in real quick. Timelash. Have you seen it lately? Have you seen it with the updated effects? What do you think of it with the original effects? Comment down below. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button. I also have a Patreon if you like what I do and would like to support what I do. This was a patron request, actually. Well, not a patron request. This was the winner of a Patreon poll. If you want to vote in polls for stuff I watch, or some tiers even do get patron requests, you're welcome to check that out. There's a link to that down in the description below. Several different tiers there to choose from. I do want to give a shout out to a couple of my top tier patrons, Colin Coney and Perkins. I appreciate their support, as I do the support of all of my patrons. It's very much appreciated. I also have a link to my Amazon wish list down there, as well as a link to my Amazon UK wish list as well. YouTube memberships are available. And most importantly, thank you for watching.